I'd flown back to Illinois, where I was raised, and that's one of the Bible sections that I read to him, and it really helped in terms of putting him in a different spot. Not medically, it didn't help, but it helped mentally and emotionally, giving him a sense of peace and calmness. With my mother's, when she was dying, the use of what is known within the Christian tradition of the Lord's Prayer also was very effective in comforting her, and which in turn, I would add, also comforted me. Certain select verses, I'm sure such exist also within Islam, within Buddhism, be it a sutra that is used or what have you, they can have a calming effect and help one who's undergoing the difficulty stabilize them and help give them a sense of calmness and connect to the divine, whatever they may understand that to be or mean. The next slide deals with the role of tradition and rituals. Tradition and rituals generally help individuals to mark significant events and realizations. They're kind of markers, behavior patterns or what have you, that mark time or mark where we are in a certain event. They give one a sense of familiarity and predictability. They often can offer comfort and security and ease distress. As such, they can be a source of inner strength, and they lead one to a deeper level of a sense of belonging or fitting in. Some general thoughts I had about tradition and rituals. First of all, I think the effects tend to be more visceral than cognitive. You feel them in your gut or your bones as opposed to think about the effects of tradition and rituals. I personally tend, in my own life, not to appreciate rituals and traditions that much. And I don't mind violating them or discarding them when they become almost a habit without thinking about them. Well, once I learned their importance and how meaningful they can be by violating them in a group setting. I was once leading a worship service, and at its close, this group traditionally joined hands in a closing circle of fellowship in silence. Well, the service was coming to an end, and I thought, let's not end it the normal way. Let's do something differently. And we did that. Well, there was such a strong reaction, negatively, to my having dropped that ritual. I learned never to do that again. Too many people missed it and longed for it. No, they didn't get angry at me, but they really craved it. And I found it very amusing in some ways, because this was a group that thought of themselves as very well educated, very much free thinkers, creative, out of doing things differently, not afraid of change. And yet I made one little tiny change, and people were really upset about it. So obviously they got a lot of comfort. It marked the end of the service. They needed that. They wanted it. And so from then on, I used it. I gave it to them. In a similar vein, I'd like to share the following reading by John Updike, found in Self-Consciousness. He writes, "Toward the end of Philadelphia Avenue, beside the park that surrounds the town hall, I turned and looked back up the straight sidewalk in the soft evening gloom, looking for what the superstitious old people of the county used to call a sign. The pavement squares, the house fronts, the remaining trees receded in silence and shadow. I loved this plain street, where for 13 years no great harm had been allowed to befall me. I love Shillington, not as one loves Capri or New York, because they are special, but as one loves one's own body and consciousness, because they are synonymous with being. It was exciting for me to be in Shillington, as if my life, like the expanding universe, when projected backwards, gained heat and intensity. If there was a meaning to existence, I was closest to it here." Clearly, Shillington was home to him. and it gave a sense of familiarity and predictability. He knew where he was, and it just felt right to him. I once had a similar experience attending a family reunion, or not family reunion, a class reunion, after I'd been out of school and away from my hometown for over 20 years. My wife came with me, and she made an interesting observation as we were standing out at a park, just chatting with friends. And these are people that I'd not seen for a long, long time. And her comment was, you know, Jim, I've never seen you so relaxed in talking to people. Well, what it was, I knew them and they knew me for 20-some years from like my first day in school. And I'd gone through school with this whole group of people. It was a small school. Our high school graduating class was 60 people. So it was traditional. They knew me, I knew them, we knew what to expect. And I was just totally relaxed. And I thought that was interesting. So tradition and rituals certainly do play a role, and a valid role, in a sense of spirituality and in relating to the world. How can the healthcare team help in terms of spirituality? Well, often you don't think of healthcare teams as dealing with spirituality, and yet they need to. Listening to the fears, hopes, pain, and dreams of the person with Huntington's disease, as well as those of the caregiver, are really crucial. You want to know the whole person. You need to treat the whole person. And by hearing the hopes, pains, and dreams of the person, you get a better understanding of that person, and the person feels cared for in a greater dimensional way. One way that can be done is by taking a spiritual history. And this can be done by yourself. Actually, you can take your own spiritual history, and that's sitting down and writing or telling to somebody different periods of time in your own spiritual development. You'd have to sit down and think, like, when did you first understand spirituality? When did you first become interested in religion? When did certain key events happen? And the key events are what you consider important, not what I would consider important, but what was important in your own spiritual development. Was it a retreat or camp someplace? Was it going out into the woods by yourself? Was it a mystical experience? There's all sorts of possibilities. The healthcare team can also help by being attentive to all dimensions of patients and their families: body, mind, spirit. The healthcare team can also incorporate and reinforce spiritual practices as appropriate. They can be encouraging. They can be supportive. The healthcare team can also involve chaplains as members of the interdisciplinary healthcare team. You can also invite in your local clergy person as part of helping care for an individual. In fact, best practices usually involve a chaplain at this point. In some of your major hospitals, the chaplain is very much a role, part of the, quote, treatment, end of quote. One thing I would encourage you, if you believe, went ahead too fast, if you believe that your spiritual beliefs are affecting your healthcare decisions, or your ability to follow through with your healthcare team's recommendations, talk to your doctor as well as to your spiritual leader or chaplain. Let them know what's happening. Be honest. They need to hear the truth from you. If you have spiritual beliefs, worries, or concerns that are causing you stress, again, talk with your doctor and your chaplain or spiritual leader. The American Association of Medical Colleges states that spirituality is recognized as a factor that contributes to health in many persons. The concept of spirituality is found in all cultures and societies. It is expressed in an individual's search for ultimate meaning through participation in religion and our belief in God, family, naturalism, rationalism, humanism, and the arts. All of these factors can influence how patients and healthcare professionals perceive health and illness and how they interact with one another. End of quote. One other thing, I just realized something. In terms of taking a spiritual history, another technique that might be helpful is drawing a long line on a sheet of paper, horizontal line, and looking at that as your spiritual timeline. And you can start with your birth. At the end of the line is where you are currently in life. And then fill in the markers along the way with important events in your spiritual development. And with that type of graphic display, you can then go back and then tell your spiritual history or write a spiritual developmental chart that matches the timeline that you drew out. That might be an easier way to start off if you've never thought of spiritual history before. Okay, back to the next slide, which is exercise, a relaxation response technique. For those of you who have never tried any type of spiritual disciplines or what have you, this might be the easiest one to start with. Begin with choosing a word, a phrase, a prayer or activity that has meaning for you. That should be short. Like for the example, if you choose one word, you can choose the word one. You can choose the word peace, or if you go into a short phrase, you can use Shema Yisrael, the Lord is my shepherd, Inshallah Allah, Hail Mary, full of grace, any of those words, and then you just repeat it to yourself calmly and just keep repeating it. It's almost like having a silent inner chant. And after a while, if you're like me, you're going to find your mind wandering away from whatever you're doing. And when that happens, you don't get upset, but you just passively reject where your mind is gone and come back to the word you're repeating. Another way to do it would be to count your breathing or count your breaths. And like you count on the inhale, exhale, and you go, inhale, you say 1. When you exhale, you say 2. And you keep counting like that up to 10, and then you start over again with 1, 2, 3, 4, and keep doing that for a period of time, maybe 15, 20 minutes. But people that meditate, especially if you're Buddhist, they have a phrase called monkey mind, where basically that refers to the monkeys in trees that chatter away. You'll find your mind starts chattering away. Suddenly you'll be thinking about something that's totally irrelevant to what you're trying to do, is counting your breathing. You'll find yourself imagining things, replaying or recalling previous exchanges you had during the day. Again, you just reject those thoughts and come calmly back to counting your breath for a period of time. Basically, it results in a deep sense of relaxation with practice over time. It doesn't happen at first. But what happens with doing that type of technique, your metabolism decreases, it slows up. Your rate of breathing slows up. Your blood pressure drops, not seriously, but your blood pressure lowers. Your muscles relax. Your heart rate settles down. And you have increased slow brain waves. It truly puts you into a deep state of relaxation. With practice, it takes effort. The first few times you try, you're going to feel like you're a total failure. At least I did. But over time, with repeated practice and, again, with patience on yourself, with yourself, you'll discover you can become better at doing such. And it's a good relaxation technique, and it's certainly good for health. So how does one get started with spirituality if you've never tried to develop your own spiritual sense? To begin with, I think, identify what gives you a sense of inner peace, comfort, or a sense of strength, or a feeling of being loved and connected with the environment, with the world, with nature, with your family. And you can do this by taking a spiritual assessment. Now, we'll talk about the spirituality assessment a little bit later, but you can do that it will help you sense where you get your spiritual connections now. You can also try out a given discipline of practice and see if it fits for you. And if it doesn't, move on and experience other approaches towards spirituality. Just as a quick example of trying a discipline that didn't work for me, I had always heard about the great benefits of yoga. So I thought, well, I want to try it. And there was a yoga class offering a free trial lesson or two. Well, I went 2 times, and I discovered that I really did not like yoga. Not that I couldn't do it, I could, but it left me with a tingly sensation in my body that I didn't particularly care for. So I quit doing it. Doesn't mean I'm less spiritual than somebody that's heavily into yoga. I just have a different approach to it. And that may be true for any other technique you might want to try. If it doesn't work for you, move on. You can also read some of the various books on spirituality, regardless of the type of spirituality. That often, depending upon whether or not you like reading, is a good way to introduce yourself to different techniques of spirituality. However, at some point you have to quit reading and become an active participant. You have to try it. You can also check with your spiritual leader, should you belong to an organized religious group. They might have, he or she might have very specific suggestions for you or for your faith tradition, what they find valuable and helpful. And again, try it with an open mind, but if it doesn't work, it's okay. It doesn't say anything about you. It says something about the spiritual practice. Okay, now for the spirituality assessment. We mentioned that before. I said we'd come back to it. This is called FICA, and it's a spirituality assessment which can be found on the web. Very at the bottom of the slide, you see where it came from. George Washington University's Medical College. But we'll go through the various points. The first area that FICA looks at is faith and belief. And the questions that are asked there are, do I have a spiritual belief that helps me cope with stress, with illness? What gives life meaning to me? And each person's answer may be different there. Some people may say, no, I don't have a spiritual belief that helps me cope with stress. Other people do. Next, you look at the importance. Is this belief important to me? Is it critical? Does it influence how I think about my health and illness? Does it influence my healthcare decisions? Does my life revolve around this belief? Does it gently shape somewhat, but not really totally control what I do with my health? Community. Do I belong to a spiritual community, a church, temple, mosque, or other group? Am I happy there? And then address and care. What should be my action plan? What changes do I need to make to put them in alignment with my spiritual practice? Would it be helpful for me to see as chaplain, a spiritual director, or a pastoral counselor? There's another inventory called the Spiritual Orientation Inventory, and I personally like this one better, that it's online. Again, you see the web address at the bottom, and you can fill out the form or print it out and fill out the form. It's a psychometric device, and it has a bunch of variables that it measures. Very briefly, transcendent dimension. If a spiritual person has experientially based belief that there is a transcendent dimension in life. The content can vary widely from a traditional view of a personal God to a greater self. It measures that variable. It also measures how you deal with meaning and purpose in life. The spiritual person has known the quest for meaning and purpose and has emerged from this quest with confidence that the life is deeply meaningful and that one's own existence has purpose. You can rate yourself on that. Mission in life. The spiritual person has a sense of vocation, a responsibility to life, calling to answer. And you rate yourself on that one too. You can also rate yourself on the sacredness of life, where you fall on the spectrum. The spiritual person believes life is infused with sacredness and often experiences a sense of awe, reverence, and wonder. Material values. The spiritual person can appreciate material good, but does not seek ultimate satisfaction from them, nor attempt to use them as a substitute for frustrated spiritual needs. Then we have altruism. The spiritual person believes we are our brother's keeper and is touched by the pain and suffering of others. And idealism. How idealistic are you? Are you a visionary, committed to the betterment of the world? And are you aware of the tragic, the consciousness of tragic realities of human existence? And likewise, lastly, the spiritual person is one whose spirituality has borne fruit in his or her life. Truly, spirituality has a discernible effect upon one's relationship to self. Improving spiritual health. I think it requires a sense of discipline, and here, practice, practice, practice is important. Often it's a time for reflection, meditation, or yoga, and it may include doing good deeds for others and or acting on behalf of social justice issues. And it may include a practice of gratitude. Practices to increase attention. I list these because I think of spirituality as a function of attention. How attending are we? Do we see deeply into things, or do we only look superficially at life? For example, when we look at a book, do we see just a book, or do we see the author, the paper, the trees from which the book was made, the factory that made the paper, the workers in that factory, the lumberjacks who cut down the trees? Do we see the sunlight and soil, along with the rain, which produced the tree, and so on? How attentive are we, and how deeply do we look at whatever it is that we're looking at? And here, I'd like to quote from a quote of Henry David Thoreau's. He wrote, "My profession is always to be alert, to find God in nature, to know God's lurking places, to attend all the oratorios and the operas in nature." Clearly, in nature, he looked deeply. Spirituality also can help us focus on the present, in the here and now. I once heard a story about a monk walking in the woods somewhere in Asia. He came upon a tiger, and seeing him, and the tiger seeing him, and the monk seeing the tiger, began running through the forest, and gradually the tiger was getting closer and closer to him until he comes upon a ledge, and he jumps over it. And on the way down, he grabs hold of a root hanging out from that ledge, and it holds him. And then he looks down and sees another tiger down below. Even worse, he sees a mouse starting to nibble on the root. As he looks down, he looks up and sees the tiger above him, the mouse eating at the root. He notices a bright red strawberry barely growing on a ledge across from him. He reaches out and plucks that strawberry and eats it. He was aware of the present. The point of that fairy tale is the monk was fully present and responded in kind instead of worrying about his future. He spontaneously enjoyed the strawberry. Okay, so how does one increase spiritual attention? Well, you can use meditation, prayer, or contemplation. You can try walking a labyrinth, which you saw a picture in the last slide of somebody walking a labyrinth, to focus. Use of a spiritual director or therapist can help. Again, that usually is the person will just repeat back or reflect back what you've shared with them, and it helps highlight certain parts of your life. You can also engage in the practice of gratitude. That is more difficult than it sounds. I'd like to talk a little bit more about that a little bit later. You can engage in the practice of giving, Again, that's a spiritual discipline where you give to others. Journaling is another way of writing down what's important, what's been going on in your life. Going back to the gratitude practice, you can start off by making a commitment every day, at the end of the day, to write out a list of the things you're grateful for that happened during the day. That can really affect, with practice, how you view life. You suddenly become aware of all the things that happen that you can be thankful for. And it's a terrific way to counter depression. Other physical practice to increase one's attention in life. Hiking. And hiking is one of the best ways for me to get in touch with my own sense of spirituality. That's where I have my, quote, mystical, end of quote, experiences out in the woods, usually on my solo hike, where I just become one with nature. Jogging and running is another way of increasing one's spirituality, your sense of spirituality. Bicycle riding also can factor in too, and in those you get that endorphin rush. The next three, archery, tea ceremonies, and martial arts, tend to come from Asian traditions of spirituality, and they're highly ritualized practices and can truly help you focus and concentrate in the present. Dancing is still another way that one can engage in a spiritual practice. And I'm thinking of two types of dancing, Tai Chi, which is also a martial art, but it's also an Asian dance, and the whirling dervishes of Sufi spirituality, this Islam faith, and they actually engage in a dance that aids their own spiritual development. The practice of yoga also can work. Other spiritual practices are forms of disciplining the self. Be the practice of compassion, where you really sit with another person and feel what they're feeling, and experience what they're feeling. That in turn can lead to one getting a better sense of one's own moral issues and ethical issues, and you start working for social justice. Adopting a posture of voluntary poverty, living simply, is still another way of doing it. Developing one's sense of spiritual awareness. Living in a hermitage. You don't hear that much anymore, but it still is done. One can live alone, commune with nature, and with self. You can do it as part of an order, a religious order. It can be done. Spiritual self-care. Set a time every day to do the things that help you spiritually, to engage in community service or volunteer work, a time for meditation, quiet thinking, a prayer, nature walks, to engage in sports, yoga, attending religious services, and praying. It's no different than being a star athlete or musician. It takes work, and practice, practice, and practice. And over time, eventually, you will reach a point that you'll suddenly transcend the need for practice. You'll be able to, within that discipline, you'll have a tremendous amount of freedom where it can be spontaneous. The last two slides deal with spirituality resources. You can Google or search for spirituality and our non-religious spirituality. The spiritual inventories I showed you. The George Washington Institute for Spirituality and Health has a wonderful series of articles online. BeliefNet is another spiritual website that is not affiliated with any spiritual organization or movement, or at least any one spiritual organization. Spirituality and Health is another website. And then the last slide is books and authors I found particularly helpful. I'm feeling rushed. Seth sent me a note that we should start opening this up for questions in a moment. Okay. So if you have questions, send them on to Seth, and he will forward them on to me.
Please put all questions in the question box on the screen, and we've already sent over a couple, Jim.
I'm scrolling backwards trying to find it. Okay, that's the problem. I was going through the wrong scrolling. Okay, here's a fairly long question that uses some people's names, children's names. Would it be okay to use the children's names, or should I try to factor them out?
Why don't we, for that question, just kind of filter into like the last part?
Okay, the last, sure. The question dealt with shared different juveniles who, before they died from Huntington's, saw their guardian angels, and they were comforted by that. And then the person writes, "Heaven is amazingly filled with angels, with the heart of children. As adults, these children have shown us that heaven is real. How can we ease suffering and share the same love and spirituality with this world as our children were given?" I think the best way is by just speaking to people reassuringly that this is what has happened. These kids have seen that, and it awaits us all. I personally, and I'll share this one too, for myself, I don't believe in angels that way, and yet one of the churches that I worked with had a traumatic fire where the building was totally destroyed. And the very first worship service we held after that fire was held outside with the congregation gathering in the parking lot and being attended by other surrounding churches. They came to support us. And several people who are very commonsensical said that they saw a huge guardian angel standing behind me during the service. Okay, that was their experience. So I'm not going to deny it. And I think what you have to do is just share your understandings. This is what you saw. People might not agree with you, but this is what was true for you. And sharing that, people will hear and understand what you're saying. And it may be effective in helping them opening their eyes to a different type of experience. And here's the next question. How does one who meditates for spirituality continue this practice in the late stages of HD? Are we supposed to expect that at some point in our future we will no longer be able to practice spirituality at all? If so, how are we supposed to deal with this knowledge in the present? I think that's an excellent question. HD does not run in my family. My guess is at some point the practice of meditation for somebody with Huntington's disease would become very difficult. My hope would be by the time that stage is reached that their own sense of spirituality will be more than just meditation, that they will be much more open to other people and to experiencing the love that is being given to them. On the other hand, to the extent that meditation results in a fairly easy relaxation response, you may still be able, somebody with Huntington's disease might still be able to relax and experience that relaxation response, even though they can't continually count their breaths. I really don't know the answer to that question. I think it's worth trying and experimenting and seeing. The expectation I don't think should be too high, but we can always be wonderfully surprised and say, oh, I guess it can be done. Okay, next question is, how would you recommend fostering a sense of spirituality for people with Huntington's as they progress through the disease? How does one use spirituality to help find hope and the devastation of a disease? I think one can start with prayer or meditation with Huntington's disease before disease manifests itself, and so before, like, pre-symptomatic. And once you get into the routine, I think it would be easier to continue doing so. Not everything is going to work in terms of the spiritual disciplines, but one has to, well, you don't have to, but you could try different approaches to a discipline and choose that which seems to help. In terms of finding hope, I think cultivating a practice of gratitude would make sense. It doesn't ruin the hope, but there are still things that one can be aware of and be thankful for, just for life itself. I guess it requires discipline to sit down and think, what am I grateful for on a given day? It's very easy to get into a spot where, gee, I'm miserable, I'm unhappy, and this is not just true for somebody with Huntington's disease. I once had a very good friend who was somewhat severely depressed, and it was so hard for this friend to find something positive, to experience something positive in that person's life. And yet, there were plenty of things that one could be grateful for. And I guess it just takes, again, discipline of looking for things to be thankful for. Yes, Huntington's disease is devastating. I don't mean to downplay that. But there still is much to feel grateful for in any given life, I believe. Any other questions? Did I answer them all, Seth?
Yeah, those were the only questions we've had so far. Does anyone else have any additional questions? Just type them into the question box.
One of the things I will add, it wasn't asked, but I think much of what I had to say today applies to the caregivers as well. To help you become, if you're a caregiver, to become more spiritually well yourself and develop that in yourself. In fact, one might even argue the point that if you are more spiritual, you will help the person you're caring for be more sensitive and be more spiritual themselves. It's not a quid pro quo, but it does use kind of somebody that's deeply spiritual, other people sense and respond to. I can remember once in one of the churches I led, we had a guest speaker come in, and I immediately sensed a deep spirituality in that person, and they just radiated it. Actually, there's more than one speaker like that. I can think of several. And that tends to set the tone of the whole meeting and interaction, their own sense of spirituality. And that is contagious, what can I say, in a positive way. And I think that it can be helpful.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Reverend Jim Bridges. As I said in the beginning, this webinar will be available online in a couple of weeks. Until then, what we're going to do is, in a couple of days, we'll send out an evaluation to everyone. If you can please fill that out, that helps us tell what kind of webinars people are interested in the future. So thank you, Jim, and thank you, everyone, for attending.
Thank you, and thank you for listening.
Thanks.
Okay, take care.